Hello, and welcome to Our Punch Drunk Loves, a podcast celebrating the films we adore. I am your host, Neil Bolt. On Our Punch Drunk Loves, the idea is this. We have a guest on each episode, and they bring a film they love so much it's almost hard to explain why. Almost confusing, you would say, like they were punch drunk. So we put our heads together and explore in detail what it is about said film that they love. Revolutionary? No. Necessary? Well, we don't talk about that. It depends. But I'm hoping that this podcast can provide some sort of joyful celebration for the movies of all types. And hey, on a selfish level, I may even find a fresh appreciation for films I love or discover a love for something I'd never really considered before. So win-win if that's the case. Positivity is the key here. I don't want to waste time moaning about how overrated something is or nitpicking at plot holes. Films make you feel something, and that's the important takeaway. Sometimes just sitting and talking about them opens up a treasure chest of revelations about what makes them special. And that, hopefully, is the point of Our Punch Drunk Loves. Now, when I decided to start this podcast, I knew exactly who would be the perfect guest to get this train running. I mean, this man got me back on the podcasting saddle as I appeared as a guest on his podcast, Daily Horror Habit. And we eventually made a podcast together, the horror game-centric Safe Room on Bloody FM. He's my transatlantic pal, Jay Krieger. Hello, Jay.
Hey, I'm so happy to be here and to be joining you for your solo podcasting endeavor, but, excited all the same to chat film with you once again. I've said many times in having you on and getting to know you through Daily Horror Habit and then, of course, Safe Room, as much as I enjoy chatting with you about horror games on a weekly basis, I always relish our time together chatting film as well.
Yeah, I mean, so thank you for helping me kick this off. I mean, as you said, we've talked enthusiastically about movies so often. And so this is like training wheel stuff for me now. Having you here is like the easy way into all this because we've done it all before, had fun. And, it's part of the main inspiration for doing this at all because, having those kind of conversations where you start realizing things about films and you're like, oh, wow, didn't think that. And there's so many films out there beyond horror that I love to explore. And, we're kind of going adjacent here for this episode. But before we get into that, as a first-time guest and the first guest, as it goes, I have to have a few quick-fire questions. Well, not quick-fire because you can answer as long as you like. Really, so.
And my likelihood of rambling a little bit.
Yes, we're both very guilty of that, so it's fine. Just general film questions. So, your first film memory?
Oh, geez. Probably my first film memory was watching the Universal horror movies with my grandparents. So something like Frankenstein, and that was interchanged with Creature from Black Lagoon. I remember those being very visceral experiences in the sense that they were unlike what I was watching at home, right? Because my grandparents live down in the South and I live up in New England, so I don't get to see them all that often, but they had very different movie tastes than my parents. My parents, got me into and showed me plenty of fantastic films that didn't necessarily pertain to horror. So I have my grandparents to thank for my lifelong love of horror and science fiction and whatnot, because, they would show me the Universal monster movies, which then would bleed into, a lot of the black and white sort of atomic era creature features and whatnot, things like them. Then that would transition into like kaiju movies and these things like Godzilla and Mothra. And, they were the ones that really gave me my deep-rooted love of sci-fi and horror. And, just watching those movies with them, I'll always be thankful for, but also just being exposed to things that were very unlike what I watched at home, typically. So, just having those experiences, I think, really not only have stuck with me, but kind of shaped my long love affair with film and, monsters and things like that.
Yeah, I have similar sort of grandparent memories when it comes to film, where you just got to watch certain things you didn't elsewhere, and they had satellite TV, which we didn't have at that point, and like getting to watch movies you hadn't seen before. It was the first time I saw a Child's Play. Was there on the Halloween that my mum and dad were moving house, and we had to stay at my nan's. Yeah, I watched that and it was great. It was wonderful.
They were the ones that also had DirecTV, and we didn't have cable at my house. So my grandfather, this was before they even had like DVR or recording or anything. So they would record stuff off of TV onto the VHSs and whatnot. And so, whenever I'd show up, there'd be this stack of movies that I'd been hearing about on the phone for 6 or 7 months. And then, my mom would travel down with my brother and I, spend some weeks there during the summer and whatnot, but she would always go to bed early. And so I'd stay up late with them and watch things. And that's where I found, The Fly, The Thing, Night of the Living Dead, these movies that, that was a little bit after watching Universal monster movies. We didn't necessarily go right from Frankenstein to The Thing.
That's one hell of a night. Always.
Yeah, that probably be a sleepless night at that. But it was the type of thing where just, having people in my life that I didn't get to see all that often, but every time I did, I came back, ranting and raving about some movie that I'm sure my parents weren't thrilled I'd seen, but, my friends were all of a sudden just like enamored with this idea of like, you saw what? Imagine trying to describe something like The Thing to your buddies when you're like 8 or 9 or whatever.
It's easier these days because you can say, Among Us. Yeah, okay, so it's kind of like that. There you go. So
also, like nowadays, no matter what anybody mentions, you immediately go to Google, right? But think about in the late 90s or even a little bit in the early 2000s where we had dial-up, but it's like that was barely convenient to do anything other than like check a Red Sox score or something like that. So we also just didn't, I don't know, I was not nearly as, probably because of my age, but it's like wasn't doing research on movies and subgenres and these things the way that obviously I would do in early middle school and then into high school and as an adult and whatnot. So it was like there was something very interesting, I think, about a time period where you didn't have source of information like the internet that is today. And it was mostly word of mouth between buddies. And eventually, with stuff like Newberry Comics, somebody gets a copy of a movie or whatever, and that gets passed around in these things. So that was like part of coming up and being this sort of like film geek that I'm somewhat nostalgic for, because it was like the days now where I hear about something I've never heard of before. It's like pretty few and far between. Not to say I'm like the arbiter of film or anything, but it's like chances are if you spend enough time on the internet and certain film circles and whatnot, it's like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. I might not have seen it. And just not having that frame of reference back in the day, unless you had Fangoria or Sci-Fi Magazine. There was something to that.
Yeah, there definitely was. I mean, I cite that Empire magazine, which had like this 100 grossest moment thing, and it's basically being a checklist for much of what I wanted to see at that point. So yeah, I suppose then the next question I have is might be kind of obvious in the answer, but what's your favorite genre?
My favorite genre, no surprise, is horror. Horror is my favorite genre. I love how malleable that genre is with its subgenres. I love that, as I've gotten older, I've latched onto the genre for different reasons, which then made me explore different subgenres and these things. And being continually shown things that I didn't have a basis for, specifically at like a young age, right? Again, like seeing not only just gore and those types of things, but more importantly, just like telling the types of stories that capture things that were not like very commonplace, I suppose, in the types of movies that I was being shown at home and these things. So naturally, like you're going to gravitate towards the stuff that, your parents either tell you not to watch, they prefer you didn't watch, those types of things. But still to this day, like I latch onto, and this, like I love watching and finding like weird horror movies, things that are not necessarily like mainstream appeal because of the fact that, they either are telling interesting stories or they're telling stories that are frequently sort of like in the mainstream census, I suppose. But also there's that quality of like, oh, before you press play on this, like you should be looking over your shoulder because you don't want somebody to catch you watching this. Like that kind of feeling, like from the back in the day when I would borrow like M-rated games from my buddies when I was far too young to be playing them, and just being like, oh, sneak out in the living room, make sure mom and dad don't catch you kind of thing. Like that's always been an aspect of horror films that I still like kind of hold on to a little bit. And it plays a big part in just seeking out incredibly strange movies and whatnot that end up being memorable more often than not from far more than just like, oh, it's super gory or bloody or these things. Like it's a lot of the time just exploring interesting personas and characters in these things that don't necessarily always find a mainstream audience. So
yeah,
it's the type of thing where find a good director that's willing to do that, and it's usually a pretty good time.
Yeah, I think it's something we've discussed many a time. Yeah, but horror is just so all-encompassing. There's just so many ways to do it that go beyond, scary jump scares, blood and guts. They're all great, but you can just do so much with that genre, and you can hop into other genres and make it work. Sci-fi being probably the closest, I think, in terms of applicable genres that works well with it. We talked about The Thing, things like that. So it's perfect sort of bedfellows for that. So moving away from that, something that might be a little less predictable. Favorite actors. I say actors because I guarantee that I'm going to ask this question and people are going to say, oh, well, I like this one and this one and this one and this one and this one. So name me a handful if you need to.
Let's think. I think probably my favorite actor is Kurt Russell. And he's one of those guys that every single time he shows up in something, it's just like my day's been made, basically. Like, he's so versatile, despite the fact that, through periods of his career, it feels like he was kind of typecast as like the tough guy. But then, you get to see him have real range and even dabble in comedies, things like Overboard, something like Big Trouble in Little China, right? And I'm coming to most of these movies far after when they were originally released, right? I would say within the last 10 years, I've been much more explorative with films or subgenres that I don't always gravitate towards, or it's not something that I might seek out over some of my mainstay staple genres, if you will. And I find a great deal of freedom in that because it forces me not only to like kind of randomly select a genre. I'm like, oh, I'll look for something in that genre. And then if I see somebody like Kurt Russell, like, it's game over. That's what I'm going to watch compared to the other, 4 or 5 films I might have on a back burner for that night. Because he is just so versatile and he does a great job of being, the cool, quiet type, but at the same time, can have this other lighter side to him. Like I said, he's the type of guy where I would watch a movie sight unseen if I knew that he was in it, which is what I did with something like Overboard. And even when I was exploring John Carpenter's filmography for the first time, I had never seen Big Trouble in Little China. I was looking at it initially and kind of like, it's not really horror. And I'm in, all I watch is horror at that point when I'm in, high school or something like that. And I kind of just took a gamble on it because he was in it. And that was really sort of the primer for, looking past or breaking out of the box of like, I only like this type of movie if it's with these types of people or this person that I'm familiar with, rather. So yeah, like Kurt Russell is one of my major go-to guys. And then, somebody like Brad Pitt is, again, a guy that I would watch in basically anything, right? I've kind of I've described him over the last few years as being basically like a character actor in a leading man's body. You know what I mean? Like, he so relishes in the traditional character actor persona. And I think it's something that he's leaned into a lot more over the last 5 or so years.
Very much so.
To the degree that it's like my favorite performances of his are never when he is the leading man. It's usually when he's part of an ensemble. Recently, something like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood being a fantastic example of that, I think, in that, he really does make that movie and it's him playing off of Leo the entire time. And he has his moments where he's the focus, but it's really like him kind of just being this everyman in a role that I think he ends up producing some of his best performances, even something like Fury, which I think is one of his better performances. And even if you could say like, it's like the war veteran that's been through some shit and whatnot, kind of gruff and whatnot. There's sort of like a sentimental nature to that character that I think gets overlooked a little bit when you talk about his ability to dabble in genre, but to make things be personable. It's not always this sort of like cartoonish portrayal almost of like a character actor where you have to be loud, you have to be boisterous, you have to be the center of attention always. It's like he can be very subtle and make an impact in a scene while being this, very character driven role and whatnot. So yeah, I would say like those two, again, are pretty much the guys where like I would watch anything. And then you have people like Cillian Murphy, who, I would watch in basically anything as well. But yeah, those are like, off the top of my head, probably like three guys that I would watch in anything that they're in.
Yeah, Brad Pitt's an interesting example, isn't he? Because I think he really is one of the most throwback sort of actors we have.
Sure.
In terms of that versatility, I think Babylon's a very good example where he's basically playing that character that he is. Mm-hmm. It's very much a him role. Again, part of an ensemble. He's not the main guy. He's just in it, and you just see the best of him in that. Yeah, he has just got that old school quality. I liked a lot of films from that sort of 30s to 50s period where you had these big character actors, and these big actors who just, they have a shtick, but they could sort of move that shtick here and there. You think like Jimmy Stewart, who could be all sorts of things in different films, like while still being very fundamentally Jimmy Stewart. Mm-hmm. You can't shake the idea that it's Jimmy Stewart in the same way that you can't shake it's Brad Pitt, but he is still showing you something. It's that Clark Gable thing, thankfully less tragic, but and right. It's that Cary Grant thing even. Those kind of actors where you just they're in a film, that'd be cool to watch. I'm sure there'll be a good part of it, and they tend to pick things that are interesting. And I like that, and he's got a humility to him sometimes. I think that kind of helps with that as well. Yeah,
something like Ad Astra really sold me on sort of just being a character actor in the best sense while not fitting into that traditional mold. So sometimes gets overlooked for that quality he has. And, I am a fan of character actors, whether they have those bolsters performances or not, whether they're typecast. Somebody that I'm a big fan of is Edward G. Robinson, right? He basically has one persona, right? But he does it so perfectly well that every time he shows up in something, and, another shout out to my grandparents for, showing me lots of these sort of gangster noir films from the 40s and 50s and these things that they basically recorded off of like TCM or something. And just kind of like being exposed to these types of films, but also starting to become familiar with, some of the similar players that show up in a lot of those films. Yeah. And just because, you have somebody like Edward G. who sometimes would play almost a carbon copy of himself from certain pictures to certain pictures, there's nobody else that was doing it like him to the degree that I'm like, oh, that's cool. I still want to see him do that performance again, even if it's like perhaps the last two films I saw of him that he was in, just because he leaves such an impact. He gives so much, in some cases that sort of like bravado almost in a way that always makes an impact.
Yeah, there are some great ones like that, and he's great. I think one of the best examples for him is in Key Largo.
Yes.
Yeah, where he's just got that. He takes that shtick and he makes it menacing. He makes it weaselly, and he just makes it something else that it had been in other films. That I'd seen him at that point. And that's a film that just brings out the best of everyone in that film. But still, it's just the setup to it, ironically being the same as what would later be I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. If you think about it, always, but just execute a lot better. But
Key Largo being an example of, I would say, one of his nastier performances, but that's a testament to you really can't put character actors in this box, because when you come along and you have a director that's willing to allow them to, especially at that time period, because I'm pretty sure that was either 40s or 50s Key Largo, but it was the thing where it's like, when you find that director that's willing to allow a character actor to push the performance they're known for a little bit further, it can yield some of the best results. It can also yield an over-the-top performance that does not show the best of their abilities. But in that case, like, that's a nastier performance of his in my memory, where I was like, oh yeah, just because he's playing another mob boss gangster doesn't mean he can't add an extra layer to it that you didn't see in some of those, pre-code films or even, code films.
Yeah. I mean, my personal sort of example from that sort of era is William Holden. In Billy Wilder films especially, you have a right jump between performances from, say, what he does in Sabrina, where he's a foppish womanizer who's like really over the top comedic sort of thing, has his hair dyed blonde, everything like that, hair slicked back, sloppy steaks every night kind of guy. So. And then you have him in something like Starlog 17, where he's like, just steely, just very tight, and Sunset Boulevard again, where he just gets emasculated by this washed up movie star, and just everything that goes on in there. Just the range that man had was just incredible. He was one of those that I could look at and go, sometimes he's almost unrecognizable from that, because the way his face is and the way he's had an elasticity to it that wasn't like comedic necessarily. Just he could shift his face almost to the point where when he basically turns up in Paul Thomas Anderson's last film, name escapes me right now.
His last one, Licorice Pizza.
That's it. Yeah. When Sean Penn turns up as basically William Holden in that film, I knew straight away that he's playing William Holden like that. That's it. You just great identifier. So yeah, it's great to have those kind of actors, and Brad Pitt is very much in that mold, I think. Absolutely. But last of the questions, favorite directors.
My favorite director is by far John Carpenter. That, and I have you to thank for kind of, I wouldn't say challenging me, but like giving me the push to explore more of his filmography, because one of the first, if not the first, I think, episode that I had you on for Daily Horror Habit was a chat about Assault on Precinct 13, which I believe at that point was like the first non-horror film of his that I'd seen. And, I would say I kind of lumped Escape from New York in there, right? So it was like I had watched at that point, obviously, The Thing, Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York and whatnot. And I hadn't explored a great deal of his non-horror films. And so, you told me like, oh, I'd love to chat about Assault on Precinct 13. It's not only an early film of his, but it's like a modern Western. That, of course, ended up being probably one of my favorite films of his, which really did showcase his ability to make magic out of very little, right? And I think that just so enamored with the fact that here's a creative that basically starts from the roots and does everything themselves almost. You know what I mean? Like, he's not only a writer, he's not only a director, but also the score and whatnot. He's got the fantastic partnership with Deborah Hill, who, of course, would give us some of his, and who deserves just as much credit on some of his best works, right? And so, seeing his versatility also and playing around with genre and these things. I'm also somewhat of a sucker for, I suppose, like underdog stories, right? He is, of course, at this point, revered for his prowess in filmmaking and all of these things, but it was not always like that, right? Some of his best films were not critically received well or financially received well. Of course, the easy example being The Thing. That being a film that bombed and basically derailed his career and everything at that point. And now it's regarded as, one of the best sci-fi horror films of all time, one of the best films of all time, I would go so far as to say. And, he's somebody who, again, like even a film like Ghosts of Mars, which I'm not terribly taken with. I just saw that for the first time like last year. At the same time, though, there are elements of that just feel indicative of John Carpenter's stylistic sensibilities, his genre sensibilities, and these things that just make him such a fantastic filmmaker. And I think at this point, it's long overdue that I go back and finally watch some movies like that I haven't seen of his, like Dark Star, Somebody's Watching Me, even, Elvis, which he made with Kurt Russell, which normally is not something I'd necessarily gravitate towards, if not for the fact it's directed by John Carpenter and it's starring Kurt Russell. So there's no excuse at this point for me not have seen it.
I mean, that was literally one of the earliest John Carpenter films I watched because of Kurt Russell, like that. And it's great, I think, for what it is. It's fantastic. I think Dark Star is interesting with that because, it's very experimental, and you think of the people involved and what they go on to. It's quite fascinating, really, to see it like that. It's a tough watch the first time. I would say very much it's a film you want to be baked for. It's probably the best way to put it. Yes, or lightly buzzed in some way.
You know me very well, because that's definitely what I'm going to do, to sit through that. But
yes, if you're familiar with Red Dwarf, a TV show, that came later, but it has a lot of that same sort of lo-fi vibes that go on in there, and it works really well. But I think Carpenter is still the only director I've seen every one of his films, everything. You know, close with like Wilder, but yeah, you know, Carpenter. I was actively seeking out stuff I couldn't find easily. Like, you know, someone was watching me. You know, I had to find a fucking Spanish language copy. And that happened to have an English track, thankfully, on it, and to get to sort of complete my collection. And Body Bags, I think, being on YouTube helped, sort of thing.
Sure.
Where he's involved in that. But yeah, he's just a big part of mine as well, you know, in terms of coming into it, you know, hence why, you know, Assault on Precinct 13 was a great sort of thing to go into. But, you know, I could list so many of his films that I just love and adore. So yeah, great pick there, I'd say, definitely. With no bias at all. So, yeah, we spent 20 odd minutes doing the introductions, but we have got a film to talk about in general here. It is none of that. So the film you brought to us is Timo Tjahjanto's The Night Comes For Us. You know, a gore-tastic martial arts crime spectacle from 2018 that says Ito, an elite triad assassin, turn on his organization to spare the life of a young girl. What follows is basically 2 hours of blood-splattered carnage as various lowlifes and ne'er-do-wells hunt down the girl and Ito. So Ito and a group of thugs and assassins he knows team up to take on the might of the triads and hopefully get the girl to safety. Yeah, they hope. That's the main thing. So yeah, Timo is an Indonesian director, I believe, and he'd made shorts for several horror anthology films, including the VHS series, the ABCs of Death. He made a couple of like action-heavy films like this before The Night Comes For Us, including Headshot. And you know, he's currently, I believe, tackling that trickiest of things, the US remake of an Asian classic in a Train to Busan remake, Last Train to New York, which, you know, obviously gets the very natural why you're remaking the sacred texts, but, you know, being, you know, of Asian descent himself, I think it's probably in better hands. And given what we see in this film, could be something tasty going on there, I say. So yeah, it's the first thing I have to ask you, obviously, is like, when did you first sort of discover this film? When was your first time watching it?
So I saw this film probably 2 weeks after it was released on Netflix. And the only reason I found out about it was because somebody that I follow on Twitter, Genre Film Addict on Twitter, is a fantastic resource for people. And, you know, Christian Valentin is also a writer, and he reviews and writes these really fantastic articles about, you know, horror, but also Hong Kong cinema and these things and films that I would never hear about otherwise, you know, because he just, you know, has this breadth of knowledge, but also just like travels in film discourse circles that I just don't. And so him tweeting about something is basically like the gold standard for me. And so he made me aware of this film, and it was one of the things where I sat down, I watched it, was blown away by it, and then realized that nobody was talking about it because this was one of the early examples of Netflix completely dropping the ball on marketing what is easily one of their best films I think that they've ever produced. And given the plethora of media, both TV shows and movies that they produce and whatnot, and they get the word out about certain projects that end up being, you know, garbage for the most part, I think. But then they don't spread the good word about something such as The Night Comes For Us, which is, you know, what I consider to be probably the best action movie of the last decade, I would say. You know, I'm not going to say that I have a encyclopedic knowledge of Asian martial arts films or anything like that, right? It's kind of the genre that I'm looking to get more and more into, and, you know, finding certain things the more that they become available on streaming services and whatnot. But as somebody that was a huge champion of the Raid films, which is kind of the easiest I think, comparison, right, for films such as this. But even as somebody like myself that was a big fan of the Raid films, this just feels like the next step that you didn't know you needed or was even possible, really, because, you know, those films made an impact with not only stellar martial arts in them, but just the brutality of the martial arts itself. And basically, I found The Night Comes For Us to be the sort of, you know, the evolution of that, really, and makes the Raid films kind of look like a warm-up. in a way, with just to speak to, the amount of carnage that's in this film. And the amount of carnage that's in it is not to the detriment of the technicality of the martial arts itself, right? I think it could be easy for somebody to be like, I'm going to make a martial arts film that's super bloody and super gory. But at a certain point, I would think it would be a difficult balance between the choreography, having that be as pristine as you would expect from a martial arts film, but then on top of it, having the gore and the blood and these things that if a less skilled filmmaker attempts that balance, it might end up being this thing where it's like one takes priority to the other, or it's sort of this sloppy blending of the two. And, I would really describe The Night Comes For Us as an action slasher. That's how over the top brutal it is. And it never feels like a detriment to the action portion of that merging of action and horror.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to it, there was like moments where I was like, oh yeah, this bit, oh yeah, there's a bit. So it was never like the forefront of my memory of these big gory set pieces. The only one that really sort of stuck with me like throughout, like permeated beyond the scene it was in, probably because the scene itself was so good, was near the end, where you had like the freeway fight. But we'll get to that. So if we sort of roll it back somewhere towards the beginning, we'll try and keep it fairly chronological, but obviously the way these things go will be chopping and changing, whatever. And we're not going for a note for note sort of run through of the film here. We're just trying to get through things that are interesting, things that make it what it is and make it such a great film. So from the off, we get this scene, where they are just basically gunning down this village, these triad gangsters. And we very quickly get the setup of what the story is, where Joe Taslim's Ito decides, fuck this, I'm not having them kill this little girl, and turns on his own men, basically, and from there, everything goes to shit. So, an early question I've got to ask you here is, Joe Taslim as a sympathetic hard man seems, it works, but why do you think it works so well for him? What is about him that sort of makes him this really workable, reasonable sort of hard man, where you can like get on board with the fact that he's, yes, a criminal, a bad guy, done all that stuff, but he goes out of his way for some sort of redemption throughout this film.
Well, I think that, you have the obvious where it's when he's introduced, it's that he's the savior of this little girl, right? It's like, oh, he can't be all that bad. But that very simplistic sort of plot point, I think, flourishes and sees sort of dividends the longer the film goes on, because of the fact that you see how repugnant the rest of the characters are in this film, to the degree that it's kind of like, okay, at least he has this sort of threshold for some semblance of morals, right? Because you see what all the other people that are in the triad lifestyle are doing and whatnot. And even a character such as White Boy Bobby, right, who is one of his old crew members and whatnot, but you see that he has succumbed to the drug trade, right? So he's this addict and whatnot who is struggling in that way. You see how being involved in crime has affected other people and basically like poisoned them, whether a substance was involved or not, in various ways. And while he is this hard man at the end of the day, you get to see how he has up these walls as a means of protection, which, initially when he kind of like regroups with his old teammates that are still alive, right, or the ones that have evaded incarceration, basically it's like he tries to pick up where he left off, but it's after a period of time because he has to let those walls very naturally come down. There's even sort of, and it's probably, I suppose, getting ahead of myself, but it's one of the weaker aspects of it, but like they hint at like a romantic relationship with the woman that helped save him and whatnot at the beginning. And you just get the sense that when he is stacked up against a majority of the other people in this world, that he has these sort of morals, if you will, that he's not willing to break. And not that that's the most original take for a hard man, but I think that when you get further into this movie and you explore more of the triad, you see how it shaped people's lives and how, while he has lost the illusionment of like what it is to be one of the 6 C's, right? So it's like, oh, it's all this power and money and these things. Like that's an allure to everybody that joins it that they barely shake, most of them. And with him, he's completely shaken it. So it just shows that he has a level of, I suppose, humanity to him that was not completely corrupted, right? Whereas then you have Arian, who is his, basically his mafia brother, if you will, who has completely fallen for the ruse of being this all-powerful triad drug member, gangster, right? And if anything, he's fallen further down the rabbit hole the longer the film goes on, whereas Ito is quite literally trying to crawl out of that life and have some semblance of a life outside of that. So it's the thing where it's like, I'm on board from the jump because he's like, yeah, I'm not going to execute a child. Like, that's a bridge too far for me, despite all the other heinous shit it's been hinted at that he's done. But at the same time, he's the only one that draws some sort of a line in the sand, whereas basically everybody else you meet, with the exception of one instance with Arian, they either are unwilling to or are not capable of doing anymore.
Yeah. And in all cases, I think that it's all embroiled so deep in this life that there is no happy sort of resolution, whatever you do, because you're too far gone. Once you're in debt to this group, you are done for, one way or the other. So, we mentioned Arian there, and I think his introduction to this story really properly is in that strip club.
Yeah.
Where we get the first real big fight scene of the film. And I think that scene sets the bar, doesn't it, for this? It really does just show you what this film is about. I liken it, in video game terms, I liken it to the introduction to Majima in Yakuza 0, where they give him this, where there the character anyway through various other games, but it's such a different introduction where it's just showcasing a different side of that character, and it's like, oh wow, yeah, now I see something I didn't see before, but makes total sense of the character. And what little we know of Arian as the film goes on, this scene makes more sense in terms of like his composed side, his reserved side, if you will, where he is very much a tool of this organization who is willing to do whatever it takes to make things right, but being very dangerous with that, so that he is a useful tool. Yeah,
and I think this is a great credit to Timo Tjahjanto being the only person that can really nail this unique style of action and martial arts. He not only, has the background in horror, as you stated in the intro, right? So he is accustomed to graphic violence in films and whatnot, but to see him take his time as a part of the Mo Brothers, which was like the collective of him and another director who went on to do like the Queen of Black Magic early on, right? So they had dabbled in both horror and in action together. And to see a film that feels and is most indicative of like growth of a filmmaker, and I would say explosive growth, because, you mentioned Headshot, right? Which I think on its own is a fine action film that has inklings of this, right? Of capturing that blending of brutality with precision of martial arts and the sort of dance-like nature of that. But at the same time, like from a technical standpoint, I think that film is far inferior because, and he's even said on Twitter through sort of threads that he had made about production of the film, there's a lot of shaky cam in that movie, which is due to it being a lot of handheld for whatever stylistic reasoning, which I think was kind of like a hindrance. Whereas here, not only is it technically filmed better to the degree that it captures more of the fluidity of combat, but it really has a great understanding of the importance of having contrasting styles of martial arts and just violence in general. And I think that the introduction for Arian is really great because it shows something that is presented far more elegantly than Ito's introduction. Ito is, on a beach surrounded by bodies. He's got an AK, and then, we know that later on he mows down his squad, but it's like the impression you get of Ito is that, okay, he's somebody that's capable of violence, but it can be very explosive and almost like brute force, which plays out into his future fight scenes. But then it almost makes Arian's introduction with that bar fight even more surprising because of the presentation of it being an introduction of this sort of like elegant lo-fi club with neon. It kind of feels like a Nicholas Winding Refn film for a minute, where it's got this sort of synth score in the background. Everybody's kind of dolled up for the club. And then you've got, the neon soaked back room. And then you just see the precision in what he's doing. And when he's fighting all these guys, and it's, I suppose in layman's terms, it builds routinely, right? It's that he's either knocking these guys down. It's either he's immobilizing them with like taking their own knives and stabbing them in various joints and ligaments and whatnot. But then, of course, it's how that scene ends, right? And the scene ends with him basically breaking a bottle, sticking it in the guy's mouth, and slamming the guy's face off of the table, which, like, I was legitimately speechless when I saw that, because you're not expecting the film to go to that level of brutality, right? It's like, okay, it's one thing to punch a guy in the throat, break a guy's neck, break his leg, stab him in the shoulder so he can't use his arm or whatever. But to see that finisher move is just like, oh, okay, this is the primer for we're completely unprepared for what's coming. And the film just builds from there.
It does, yeah. I mean, that's what I mean. It really does just set the bar where this film is going in so many ways. And it's that bulk kill I was going to mention. It's just shocking, as you said, in that sense, where it's just like, oh, okay, now I know what kind of movie we're in for, like that. And, you know, given generally what I'd seen of movies of a similar ilk before, including like stuff like The Raid, you know, I did not expect that, you know, like that was just saying something. One of the things that sort of permeates these early scenes is like, you know, the dialogue is very straightforward. You know, there's no oversimplification, but there's also no long-winded exposition. It's all just told in a very matter-of-fact way. Everything gets dealt with in a way, and you know, it's a mix of, you know, languages, you know, including English. And yeah, I think that's one of the film's strengths, is that it has a story. It's getting to the point of it. Something that constantly bugs me about like the John Wick films, for instance, is that you have lots of talk about what's going on about John Wick and how dangerous he is, but that's the story. You know, there's all this background stuff about, you know, all these different organizations and the lore and the history behind it, but they don't really matter, because the main thing is like they're all stupid because they want to take on John Wick like that. And despite, you know, saying how that's a bad idea, here it's just like none of that stuff is really there. You know, we know there are criminal organizations involved. We know there's relationships between key characters in Nito and Ariane here, but it's straightforward and lets the action flow, I think.
Well, also, I think this film does better than what John Wick does, in the sense that, you know, John Wick is all about the mythology of John Wick. It's all about sort of talking about this idea that in this world of assassins and murderers, there's sort of a code, right? That's not explicitly always spoken, but it's kind of like this thing where it's like just the way in which that world operates. And I find that this film does a better job of that, because not only, as you mentioned, like it's very straight to the point. It doesn't bog you down with a lot of dialogue in terms of like, oh, let's explain everything and you know, the customs of being an assassin and these different things, because it plays out in the action, right? And I think that ultimately is why this film, for being 2 hours, feels probably like a 90-minute movie, even shorter in my opinion, because of how fluid everything is, from the story beats to the action and the fighting. Like, you get in each of those fight scenes an idea of what the sort of, I suppose, modicum of respect you show to a fighter, a fellow fighter in this world, in that it plays out in whether, you know, people that in certain martial arts scenes, when they're fighting, somebody gets thrown to the ground, they give them a second to stand up. They don't have to have this whole set piece about honor and respect and fighting your opponents and stuff like that. It kind of just plays out naturally in combat. And I would say also, you know, maybe it's not the best example to build off of, but like something that I greatly appreciate with this film, and it's not a direct comparison to John Wick and whatnot, because, you know, the gun fu is very front and center with those movies, but I love Timo's approach to guns in this film, because, you know, guns are not the end all be all of scenes, if you will. You know, there are scenes that begin with somebody that has a gun, and there are scenes that end with the character coming into possession of a gun. But the gun itself never dictates the entirety of a scene. It's never a cheat code, if you will. It's a cheat code in the sense maybe you get to kill one or two people before whoever has the gun gets disarmed, and then you go right back to fisticuffs. And that, again, is maybe not intentional in the mythology of the assassins and their fighting tendencies and these things, but it overall, it never allows the martial arts and the pristine approach to martial arts that I think this has to be overshadowed by something like that. It really does allow these fighters and martial artists to allow their skill set to sort of come through in a way that feels very natural, rather than, again, having to have these long set pieces about what it means to be a 6Cs and the honor and respect and fight, and just kind of getting bogged down in the mythology jargon, if you will.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, there is a mythology hinted at, but it is just hinted at. It leaves a bit to the imagination, which I think is a great way to do it. Now, we're talking about the combat there, and how it goes, and not long after all this, we get that scene. Well, we get the introduction to who Ito has to kind of go for, which is Johan, who works in the butchers, and I love that Johan has this boss style and intro video, like making him seem like he's some badass, is going to be really hard to beat or whatever, like that, in a very traditional sort of cinematic way, where he's going to be the big bad you're going to face next, and like that you've got to beat him, and then he's just fuck all. I love that, and he's just a sniveling coward that gets roasted in the best way possible. But it leads to that butcher shop fight, which I think is the first time you really get a sense of how inventive the combat will be in this film. You have the bone saw, you have the cleaver going, the cleaver smile, if you will, and it's just amazing. You had those moments that are just really visceral, and I think the odd bit of CG blood that doesn't maybe look as good as the rest, but generally it's paced and shot in a way that is just constantly like chaotic and messy, and it in the best possible way. It really is a proper showcase. The thing we'd seen with R.E.M. was like a taster. This was like the first proper showcase of how brutal this film is going to be and how mean it will be with how it treats the people in it. And it is something to sort of really kick things off properly.
Johan really gets like the Looney Tunes treatment with the amount of brutality inflicted upon him, which is great. Like you get to see it. He gets his toe blown off, and then he gets, fucked up in a fisticuffs thing, and then he runs away, and he continually keeps getting shot in ways that it's like they just keep stringing him along but not killing him off until the end, when he has, this almost like cartoonish 1920s sort of execution of a mobster with Tommy guns, basically. But no, I think you're 100% correct in the butcher shop really allowing Timo to go off and show his inventiveness, right? And that's the thing, like the fights themselves are dictated by the environment that they occur within, which gives each of them some semblance of originality. I'm not the most well-versed in the greatest of martial arts film, but one of my sticking points with some martial arts films in the past has been, you get to see the technical proficiency of the fighters and the choreography, and not to say that it's bad, but it never feels like it builds at points with certain films. It feels like what you see in the first 5 minutes of a fight is what you get in the last 5 minutes of a film. Yeah. Whereas with this, the fighting is really dictated based on the environment in a way that reminded me of some like old school Jackie Chan movies, right? In that a lot of it is based upon where he's fighting and what he's able to do and the inventiveness there. And with this, of course, the needle in terms of brutality is going the other way. It's the most inventive brutality you've seen in a film. And I think that the butcher shop is great because it's a great example of guns never being allowed to become a cheat code, because he only gets off 2 shots before he loses the gun, Ito. And then, he's contending with all these butchers that have the tools of their craft in addition to fisticuffs. But then it begins very simplistic with like, okay, there's a meat hook, there's a knife, but then it evolves into cow carcass. Yeah. And then you've got the saw blade, and then it's breaking a bone in half and stabbing a guy in the head with it and hitting a guy in the nuts with it and these things. And it's a great just level of inventiveness, I think, that doesn't allow that film or that scene or the film in general to really, I suppose, rest on the laurels of what was successful in a scene that happened prior, because it's continually evolving based on the environment that fights are unfolding within. And again, the butcher shop is such an over-the-top sort of set piece for violence to occur within. The weaponry that's used is over the top, but again, I'm going to continually come back to the fact that the choreography never takes a hit for some of the maybe more creative, more outlandish set pieces or weaponry that's used, because it's all just, again, the most brutal martial arts I've ever seen that always lands for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we sort of get that little quiet period just after that before we have a really sort of extended sort of fight, if you will.
Yeah.
And we are properly introduced to White Boy Bobby,
Yeah.
played by Zach Lee. And I would honestly say, in modern terms, probably one of the greatest cameos in an action film. Because Zach Lee is just instantly dazzling. Something about that character, the way he portrays it, he's a piece of shit, sad sack, feeling sorry for himself, bitter towards Ito, but still loyal, and you get that in a really short space of time, and you get to know that character for the short amount of time he's in it, in terms of how he saves the woman, make sure she's out the action like that and stuff like that, and he's just fascinating, straight away. You've had half an hour or so of this film being like it is, and then you get him coming into it, and he's just, wow, who's this guy, like that sort of thing, and everything about him is just magnetic. He just draws you to him. And
I love that you learn so much about his character just from his initial introduction, to the degree that, or maybe this was a me thing and not a general audience, I suppose, experience, but it's kind of like you start to make certain assumptions about his character, right? Well, he's this guy that's addicted, that's aggressive towards the protagonist, so he's going to become a weak link in some semblance of that. Also, like the one interaction physically he has early on with Ito, he stumbles over and it reveals that he's got this fake leg, right? So it's like that sort of made me count him out a little bit in terms of what he's capable of from an action set piece, right, and standpoint. And then he ends up being basically the person that saves everybody for that scene, right? And I think that is not only a testament to Timo perhaps sidestepping a traditional route that you might take for a character like that and make them be the weak link that's going to betray everybody or just not really have much of a footing, if you will, with the action that comes later and the fighting and whatnot. But then, like I said, he becomes the savior, and he's an absolute unit when it comes to fighting. And it's great because you get to have different styles of, I'm just going to say, like violence or fighting, right? Because you have these people that are clearly trained in martial arts and whatnot. Then you have people that are solely like the street thugs that are relying on weapons. And then you have White Boy Bobby, who doesn't seemingly have any fighting skills other than being an absolute unit that, can be inventive on the fly with that, the metal caution sign that you find when, somebody's mopping up and whatnot. He uses that as like Kevlar to avoid getting mowed down by an Uzi. And then just the general sort of like drunken brawl style that he has of just like grabbing dudes and fucking them up consistently is a nice sort of contrast, I think, to the elegance of a lot of the fighting in this, for as elegant as, hacking somebody's head off with a machete can be. But I think also, with that apartment set piece, going from the butcher shop, which is inherently more unique of a fighting locale than just an apartment living room, I think that it really does show Timo's ability to just further evolve the expectations, because while the apartment scene itself is like very mundane and almost nondescript, it allows him to tap into something that almost feels akin to like in John Woo films, how people can either get shot 1,000 times before they die, or guns can be fired 1,000 times before they have to be reloaded. But the apartment scene allows Timo to kind of establish, I suppose, this sensibility where it's like, you can get stabbed 20 times, whether it's a protagonist getting stabbed and they'll be okay, or just stabbing bad guys like 30 times in a row before going on to the next guy. Like, it allows for a cartoonish level of violence to be established in a way that is not always reliant on the setting itself. But the setting itself is so mundane that it gives him the freedom to like, okay, let's make this unique in a way that isn't overly reliant on the setting itself of the scene.
Yeah, I mean, two things come to mind in this: the wet floor sign, kill, and the window broken glass kill. Like that. They're just the broken glass, especially because the way it's teased, it's like, it's coming, it's going to happen. It's just, but they keep sort of teasing it's going to happen and then just sort of edging away from it again. And it happens and it's great. And there's these little mini fights going on everywhere, and it gets torn apart into different areas, and it just goes all over the place. And one of the people involved in that is Fatih, who I think is an underappreciated combatant in all this. You think of the fight in the apartment, and then subsequently in the car park. And he has that badass send off as a character. Not traditionally compared to everyone else, feeling like the fighter, he's very much feels like the educated one, if you will, of the film, and yet he holds his own. He does everything right to the very end. So yeah, it's a really fascinating sort of tableau you get with these different characters fighting in different places. The introduction of the two female assassins as well, and their weaponry as well. And the way that ends, White Boy Bobby as well, is just, very blunt. It's very, one of the things this film does so well is just it's very uncaring about characters and their fates. It doesn't give them plot armor. It's like, here's White Boy Bobby. He's great. He does all these things like that. He's really charismatic in this really douchebag way. But, he's, ultimately, we're going to be realistic about the kind of guy he is, what he is, who he is against these people. He's not going to get the better of them like that. He'll try to the very limit of it. But he gets a great showcase for those assassins, that they ultimately get to show throughout the film, the scenarios.
Well, I think that's, again, a great way to characterize sort of Timo's approach to this film, in that nobody has the narrative body armor, as you said, but at the same time, everybody is at least given their chance to make an impact on the viewer in a meaningful way, whether it be through violence or narratively speaking. Like, again, White Boy Bobby being able to be this force that people basically write off initially, but then is able to show that, there's more to this character in the depth, and it's shown through action rather than having to be told it, right? And the fact that he sacrifices himself to let Faith and the others escape and whatnot, which then basically just kicks off the next act of the film, which is them being on the run and whatnot. And, good shout for Uncle Faith, right? And the fact that, that character that initially is not shown to be like this warrior, he seems like more of a strategist, right? And then completely holds his own in the apartment up until the point where, he has that badass send off, as you said, where it's like, he gets the moment where he gets to, enjoy his last cigarette. He gets to take out one more guy before, going down in a hail of gunfire.
Yeah, it's a very prophetic sort of thing for how the film ends up being as well.
Mm-hmm.
So as a point at that, it's at this point probably the high point. And while there's a lot of fighting that goes on in the second half, I think it begins to get a bit knitted together in terms of what's happening. There's less in between stuff, if you know what I mean. And there's still some cool stuff, I think, because you get Ito in the police truck, with the taser to gun kill. In that, it's just wow, just madness like that. And I think the thing I would like to sort of go into is then, as much as there's stuff in between, I think what really sells this film then is when you get to that finale area, with the penultimate fight, the fight itself. You have two fights really going on as you get towards the end of this film. You get the Ito and Ariane fight, and you get the two assassins, lady assassins, against the other lady assassin who's sort of been reluctantly embroiled in this thing with Ito.
Mm-hmm.
And she's looking after the kid while Ito goes off and takes on Ariane. And these two fights in their own right, they take place separately for the most part once they really get going, but they are the standout moments for so many ways, I think, because they just feel so brutal, so personal, I think, in terms of the Ito and Ariane fight. But before we get to that fight, I think I have to talk about that freeway fight.
Yeah.
Because it is the moment in that film for me. Just the choreography of it, just the fact that it is, they've already established how badass all three of these women are. in various ways. And again, taking that idea that nobody's, getting away with anything here. You can fail and die here, no problem. And this fight just shows that in so many ways. And it's just fantastic. Like one of the best action fights I've seen in a big film, in recent years, without a shadow of a doubt. Right down to the end of it, where you have the one remaining enemy assassin going one-on-one and like literally having their guts spilling out, fighting still like that. Yeah. But it being the reason that they end up losing because, now suddenly their great ice cold focus is taken away from them because they've got to keep their stomach in while they're trying to fight. But still fighting. It's just remarkable. It was the point for me with this film. I was like, fucking hell, this is something special. Like as much as I'd seen everything else and been like really wowed by it, it was just, this fight was just the best example of choreography, cinematography, and just how the brutality of this, and the cold brutality of it, because it just goes places that are just mean spirited, really, it does not hold back.
Well, this is the thing with that scene, right? There's safety in numbers in terms of scenes. We've seen characters square off against, 20, 30 guys in certain scenes. And you get that with Ito when he goes to the warehouse, right? Before the final fight with Arian and whatnot. Even go back to the apartment fight. Even going back to the butcher shop. It's usually handfuls, if not more, against a solo fighter or a small group of fighters. And with this, when it's so intimate, it's this 3-way fight, a 2-on-1. And at the same time, it highlights one of the aspects of this film that I love. And again, does something I think even better than the John Wick films does, which is establishing this rogues gallery of assassins and their specialty without having to have this laborious played out dialogue about their backgrounds and everything. Like, you infer a great deal about characters just from either their very unique looks or their fighting style or the weapons that they use. And I think that that's something that both Elena and Alma, who are the 6Cs members that the operator fights, are like clearly defined by their weapons, right? They have these unique weapons.
I think it's like a Kukuri blade, isn't it? I think
that's the one. It. Alma has sort of this garrote wire that has a ball on the end of it, which, she lovingly wraps around a character's neck early on and, slices their throat and whatnot. And it's nice to see contrasting fighting styles and weapon styles and whatnot coming together in one scene that is as cohesive as you could ever want a fighting scene to be. Again, I'm now at this point now, it's been an hour of me rambling about how brutal the violence is and, the tight choreography and whatnot, but it's as much about setting the stage and the environment as it is capturing what is happening. I'm sure there's cuts obviously in certain things, but it's not done to the degree that I think some people, in terms of general audiences perhaps, will write off certain action films as being like, oh, it's just plenty of quick cuts, too much editing, you can't see what's happening. And I honestly can say that I've never felt The Night Comes For Us is unclear in its combat, if you will.
Oh, no, I mean, points it literally just has the camera follow arm movement, leg movement, like all the way down, all the way up again, like that. And, that just makes it feel like the opposite of what we were talking about earlier with the shaky cam in Headshot. It really does just sort of bring the focus. It's like, no, you're coming along for every second of this, like that. And it really is just special, isn't it?
And, another point about Headshot, as much as I enjoy the fights, that film has a boss structure to every single fight. And I think it's mostly due to the pacing and it's the build up to things. And, The Night Comes For Us streamlines the narrative a lot in this film to the degree that when the fight scenes occur, it doesn't feel formulaic. And maybe that has something to do with the settings being as interchangeable as, or rather being as different as they are from the one that came before them. But I just never felt like there was this clear-cut blueprint structure to how the film plays out, that when you have these set-piece battles, it kind of just feels very naturally flowing into them. And the fact that you can go from, the operator having a shootout and whatnot to then bleeding right into this, 2-on-1 fight, that's probably, again, the most technical fight of the film. And it ratchets up the brutality again in ways that you're not expecting, whether it's Alma getting the garrote wrapped around her neck and then getting wrapped around an AC unit that gets kicked out of the window that severs her own throat and fingers, to, you know, the other one that has the blade that we mentioned, and having this really intimate one-on-one, but then of course, you know, getting her guts spilled, and not only that, but like getting stabbed in the arm and then having the blade slid all the way down from her basically elbow to her wrist is probably the gnarliest fucking thing I've ever seen. And the fact that when I rewatched some of the fight scenes before recording this, you know, I'd literally have to look away at that moment because it's so upsetting and so visceral in a way that, you know, a lot of the film is, but it's just something about that horror sensibility that Timo has that allows certain kills to just stand out in a way unlike anything else I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit we'll get to in a bit that was like a stand-up thing when my son sort of walked in on the end of the film, but we'll get to that. Yeah, we're talking about this other fight that was going on, and you're right to mention, you know, that Ito has like a fight with a bunch of goons before he fights Arian, which I had meant to sort of include as part of this. And yeah, that, you know, is great on its own level because, yeah, the whole ingenuity of like padding himself up for it by literally just using fucking phone books as armor.
One of my favorite tropes in either film or TV is just like using phone books basically as Kevlar.
Yeah, you know, because, you know, that old legend of how, you know, hard it is to rip a phone book like that, and, you know, he does just pad his body with you know, duct tapes, other stuff to his body, like, and, you know, and you see why it's so necessary as you get into that fight. And there's a great example of what I was talking about, you know, the camera following certain shots and like stuff with the pool thing, and like, there's just so many horribly grisly things in that, but it's also just a really, it feels like the most angry fight scene of the lot. You know, it just you can feel that it is penultimate in a way that, you know, isn't being outright told, but just in the way that he's just going ham on everyone. You know, and just really just kicking the absolute shit out of every person he comes across. And even if they can get him, you know, he's padded himself in those ways that he has, and yeah, it's a great selling point to get to that finale.
I'm just seeing this guy that's been the ultimate badass for a majority of the film and then be faced with his biggest threat, which is, you know, having him fight 100 people basically. And he's just even more inventive. And the fact that, you know, it kind of just reinforces this is a character that is not going to allow anything to get in their way from what he wants, which is this one-on-one fight that the movie's been building towards. And the fact that, you know, they, again, kind of take it to this Looney Tunes almost level of violence where it's like he's going to fight 100 people and he's going to use everything at his disposal and apparently never runs out of endurance and is just like invulnerable to baseball bats to the elbows and forearms and whatnot, is just, you know, so great to see. But it doesn't ever become slapstick to the degree that you kind of like start to tune out, because again, it comes back to just the proficiency of the fighting. And if anything, in that warehouse brawl scene, it's a great example of just not only squibs, but just of utilizing blood and gore in martial arts, where it makes, and it's just as much a testament to like capturing those moments, but they don't lose their visceralness no matter how many times you see somebody get their ankle broken or their shin broken, because around the corner, it's going to be somebody takes a meat hook to the nuts, or, you know, taking the pocket net from a pool table and having it full of pool balls and just smashing it against the guy's head until it just has a geyser of blood pop out, using a guy as a human shield as he's getting hacked to pieces with machetes and whatnot. Like, the film just builds and builds and builds and excites and shocks in ways that you just don't normally associate with martial arts films. I don't care if you're, you know, somebody that consumes all of martial arts media. I guarantee you that this is a film that would still leave people speechless at moments because of the fact that it goes in directions that are just not overly common. And it's furthermore why I think Timo's the only person that could have made this movie.
Yeah. Given the background of his work before and after this, it's Timo all the way, isn't it? It's just a very distinct style, you know, and I think it is just making everything as brutal as possible. I think it is definitely the thing that comes across. There's a rawness to the things he makes, and, you know, this is in some ways the rawest because of how nasty things can get. And yeah, that fight is just a constant reminder of like how savage, you know, Ito can be. And yeah, it just leads well then into that final fight where you know the two styles you're getting. You're getting this composed but deadly guy against the guy who's just not reckless, but just he will be aggressive on the front foot, come at you like that and react to your attacks very quickly, sort of thing.
That scene also has a great example of Timo's humor and sensibility, I think, contrasted against, you know, again, his penchant for brutality and whatnot. And that's when Ito gets a shotgun off of somebody at the end of that fight. And basically he kind of gets the cheat code at the very end. It's like, here's your reward for killing a 1,000 people, basically. And so he gets the shotgun. And again, like to Timo's credit, every time a gun is used, it's impactful in a way that so few action films nail, because it becomes, you know, the frequency with which guns are used in a lot of action movies. It's like, okay, one kill is kind of like the next in a sense, right? You can't really shine a spotlight on any one moment, but guns are used so sporadically throughout this that it's like somebody's not just getting hit with a shotgun, they're getting their face basically turned into a canoe, right? Or just it's just this red mist that looks like something out of Fear. So he not only uses guns in a way that makes them incredibly impactful and memorable, considering how sparingly they're used, but you also get that shot of Ito after he's lit guys on fire, and you get this thing where they're like writhing in pain and whatnot. It's sort of slow-mo. And then behind him, there's a sign that says like safety starts with me as he's brandishing this shotgun and looking at his handiwork, which is like, again, for as brutal and violent as this film and as angry as this film is, you still get the sense that like Timo doesn't take himself too seriously, or he takes himself seriously, but not to the point where he kind of like has some semblance of an ego, I suppose. Because, you know, if somebody is going to be making a film that is as angry and violent as this, you can see some filmmakers getting lost in that, I think.
Yes.
And I just don't get that sense with Timo. And, you know, what little I know about him from just, you know, social media posts and these things, he just seems like somebody that has a good idea of who they are and doesn't necessarily take themselves too seriously, but their work proves itself in terms of their craftsmanship and the fact that, you know, they are incredibly good at what they do. But at the same time, they don't let that kind of like build this crazy ego for themselves, if you will.
Absolutely. So we go on to this penultimate, technically, because there is a scene at the end that isn't a fight, but this is the last fight, penultimate scene, if you will, with Ito and Aryan, you know, coming together to finally fight after we've had this whole sort of tease of them meeting. You know, at this point, the film has basically had them at opposite ends. You know, they're meeting from other sides of the film to get to here. Like that, they've both had their journeys. Ito's is more prominent, but Aryan's is enough that you know what's at stake for him and how much power he could gain from doing this job and taking his friend out. Now, that, you know, colours much of this fight. You know, it's the reluctance, but also a determination from both sides, where they're both fighting for something, you know, one to get out of all this finally and be done with it, you know, and the other to move on and be higher in the food chain, if you will, and be more powerful. And you know, both those desires are so strong that it really does just make this fight, you know, end to end stuff. You just, you know, hit. There's a great length of sequence in this fight where nobody really hits anyone because it's block like that, and it's just, you know, not just with the shots but also like weaponry and like stuff like that, and it just constantly goes on like that, where and it's almost wrestling level choreography, you know, where you had this just great, you know, way that they are playing to a crowd that's not there, where it's just like, you know, you're going to hit me and I'm going to hit you, but I'm going to block it, you're going to block it, like that, and then we're going to escalate it to another weapon or this weapon or that, and near misses and things like that. And yeah, I think it's insane some of the things they do in this. Now, the thing I was sort of referencing earlier, I don't know, like the bit my son was like, yeah, who's been exposed to a fair bit of gore already, but he got to this point in the film, we were eating lunch, probably didn't help, And, you know, it's where the bit where Aryan basically gets a box cutter and puts it into Ito's cheek. I think it's just the fact that Ito smiles for it and just does a very much a go on then face, just daring him to just slice the rest of his face open, sort of thing like that. And, you know, just the reaction that gets as well from Aryan as well. It's it really does just blow you away in the moment, because you've seen all this nasty stuff to this point. There's something about that just feels, because it stops and waits on it. You know, a lot of the violence happens before it kind of it's fleeting, it passes, you know, in the moment because the next thing's happening. But here is something that just stops and lingers on that, and it's something. Well, yeah, it's believable. It's something that would hurt but wouldn't kill you. But yeah, it's that kind of makes it worse, sort of thing. And yeah, again, brilliant point of selling Ito as a character. You know, just like, fuck it, I will take everything and anything you've given to me. Channeling a bit of what White Boy Bobby is, you know, as well as the further he goes into this film. And yeah, it's just, you know, in its own right, though I don't think it's the best fight, I think it's a really spectacular fight because of the stuff you've been given beforehand, you know, the background between these characters, why they're doing this, and ultimately what comes out of it, you know, in terms of how futile it all was. You know, it just feels, it's senseless violence, yeah, in the best way. Yes, yeah. And that's what makes it great.
Well, I think that, you know, first and foremost, it allows them to showcase Joe Taslim and Iko Uwais in the same scene, right? Typically, we haven't seen them in the same scene. So getting to see both of these martial artists at the top of their craft, displaying that, but at the same time, you know, having contrasting fighting styles, I think. And that's sort of hinted throughout the film or displayed throughout the film. And to get to see that play off of one another is really terrific. And you get to see, you know, Aryan is the more technical fighter, I would say. Yeah. But at the same time, Ito is the one that can take more hits. He's got a little like Joe Frazier in him, the boxer, where he's like, I can take a shit ton of punishment, and when I hit you, you fucking know that I hit you. Whereas he shrugs off basically the first dozen hits that Aryan throws at him. Granted, you know, it's momentary, but it's the type of thing where you get to see this technically proficient fighter that has this crazy endurance that, you know, there's this one string where Aryan basically like is dodging and then hits him like 6 times in the span of 2 seconds and then dodges and then does it again. And it's almost like the E Honda 1,000-hand slap kind of thing, but you know, more proficient. And then you get to see Ito, who basically gets his ass kicked for the first 3 minutes of that fight, but then he hits Aryan twice and it's like, oh, 2 of his hits are worth 20 of Aryan's. And it's just a really great contrasting fight style that matches their body compositions in a way that I think just makes sense, right? It's a little more natural than just like the small guy versus the big guy, right? Like the guy from Train to Busan, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, where it's like, that's more obvious of a type of like distinguishing between fighting styles. You've got the guy that's like this absolute unit versus a smaller guy. In this, they're somewhat similar in size, but at the same time, like their styles speak for their sensibilities and their capabilities as fighters. And just again, like the way that scene is shot, you don't lose a minute of what's going on. You get a real sense of space with everything. And the way that it's just paced and ratchets up, like the more desperate they are getting for this to end, they start reaching for the things that, you know, normal people would have reached for in the very beginning, which is things like screwdrivers and knives and hammers and these things, or X-Acto knives. And the fact that, you know, they're allowed to, as martial artists, display their natural craft or their abilities, right, of just hand-to-hand combat, and then moving into something that's more in line with Timo's horror sensibilities with weaponry and these things. And, you know, of course, getting to see that X-Acto knife in his mouth and then breaking the blade off in it is never not gruesome as shit. It makes my skin crawl. But it's nice to see the merging of, again, action, traditional sort of martial arts with Timo's more horror-centric sort of sensibilities that just turn the volume up on everything. And, you know, again, if it was a lesser filmmaker turning the volume up on your own sensibilities would begin to feel maybe like a hindrance, if anything, to what you're building off of. But Timo seems to have the wherewithal to know exactly when his own interests or influences as a filmmaker or storyteller can really pop at like an ideal moment to heighten a scene, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the end of that fight is very bittersweet, I think, in that, you know, both men are basically fucked by the end of it, you know, in so many ways. But I think, like I said, the inevitability of the outcome, and that, you know, Ariane was always being used by the Triads because of this connection, and to be sort of end like he does is very much. It feels like a proper gangster film thing, you know, like oh yeah, you thought we were all pals, but really, you know, you're a commodity, and if you don't do your job, you're dead, sort of thing. So that in itself is like a really great send off, maybe, I suppose, but in a very fitting. I would say the best thing. You know, he did the Icarus thing, you know, effectively, just with more punching and blood. So we get past that, and we get to the finale, if you will, which is basically, you know, Ito being beat to shit. He's, you know, basically half dead at this point, you know, and we get, you know, through a lot of other things that happen in between, we get to that final showdown, you know, where he's basically revving that car up, knowing that, yeah, the situation is he's there in a car revving up against a whole bunch of Triad goons with guns. The outcome is inevitable, like that. But the film once again shows Ito as a character, the determination and the I don't give a shit attitude of how he approaches every combat situation. And here it's just like, he knows he's doomed already because, you know, he's bleeding heavily from the fight. You know, he's probably going to die from that anyway, because he won't get help in time given everything else is going on. And so he takes that decision to sort of try and take out as many of them before he dies. It's that old Butch and Sundance thing, isn't it? Just like going off. You know what the result is, but it makes for a cool sort of final shot, and just that grin that he does is just, you know, a constant throughout this film anyway. Whenever he gets into certain situations, he puts on that really toothy sort of large leering smile where he just, you know, someone's about to fucking get it, you know, at that point. And, you know, that is the perfect example of it. You know, it's an exquisite send-off to that film, I think. Yeah, just leaving it where it does. Perfectly done.
Well, that's the thing, right, is that it speaks to the futility of what both of them have been spending the entire film doing, right? Because really, there's only one outcome for them in this life. And I think that for them to go through the Looney Tunes stakes again of all the violence and everything like that, and what they're able to survive, should they get a happy ending, that wouldn't fit with the sort of overall tone of the film, right? It almost makes the film take on sort of, and you know how much I love leaning on this expression, but kind of like a dreamlike quality of this movie, in that it's almost like you could imagine them dying within the first 15 minutes of the movie, and the rest of it is this like gangster's dream of what their life would be like, or this hero's fantasy, right? Because of the extremes this movie gets to, when the reality is that everybody would be dead within, you know, a couple of minutes of a fight or something like that, or most of these fights would end with just everybody being dead. So the fact that they both do meet a demise that is equally fitting while equally different feels very in line with their characters and the reality of what their arcs would be. It's like, okay, so let's say Arian gets to live at the end of the movie. He gets to become this sort of like mob lord of a certain area, or all of Jacquerat. At the end of the day, he's going to get killed by somebody else that he doesn't see coming, or just somebody that steps up to the plate. Whereas at the same time, you have Ito, where it's like, okay, he got to save the girl that he sort of had a fling with or had a romantic relationship with, got to escape. What's really for him outside of ensuring that a loved one and somebody that he felt a certain semblance of responsibility for got to escape? What does the rest of his life look like?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you can never forget that, like, even though he takes on this hero's journey and has this arc, he has a lot of sins to answer for still. And one event does not sort of save his soul or nullify that, if you will.
Yeah, it almost does from the outset feel like a doomed journey.
Yeah.
Like with it, the knowledge that it's doomed from him, he's just doing what he can before he checks out, sort of thing. With the tiny hope that maybe he can get out as well, like that. He wants to redeem himself. I think that he just comes to a point where it's a revelation for him. It's like, I can't do this anymore. I can't be like this anymore. And that just ends up being the catalyst that sets all these events in motion. Those deaths are just very perfect, for those characters, as we said, because there's the cold, clean, calculated nature of how Aryan dies, and then in Ito it's loud, chaotic, and reckless to some sort of short degree. So it's really is the perfect way to end that film in so many ways, I think. So it's a grand one for that. So before we get towards the end here, is there a scene or shot in this film that you would say is just burned into your brain?
Yeah, I would say it's the operator's fight with Elena. Again, just the way in which you've been watching this film now for almost an hour and a half, and you get to that moment, and it still continually ups the stakes, both in choreography, in brutality, but it also has the most affecting death, I think, which is the most reflective of horror, I think, right? So the fact that, not only do you have this character, the operator, who like rips off her finger, that's basically a nub at a certain point. You're like, oh, fuck, like that's gross. But then, Timo has you with the 1-2 punch of that reveal of like Elena, she's got her guts in her stomach. And then, of course, the arm slice, like I mentioned. And yeah, that whole fight scene, I think, is kind of just etched into my brain because, again, the ebbs and flows of that is so fantastic. You even have that moment where they basically have like locked blades, and they have this moment where it's just like standing still, waiting for one of them to make the next move. You got that synth score that's like just beating in the background, getting progressively more aware. And then you have like the fly that crashes into the bug zapper, which then is the catalyst for the rest of that fight and whatnot. And just, it's such a well-paced fight that has breathing room in it. And that's not something that a lot of the fight scenes in this movie have, which is not a criticism because of how those fights play out. It feels natural when you've got these massive groups, but when it's one-on-one at that point, it's like you got to have a second where you just let the scene breathe, you let people catch their breath, and then it plays out for a finale that, again, is just building, and has the biggest conclusion, or the most violent conclusion, I think, in the movie.
So to round off, don't let it be said that this is a podcast full of insipid satire and adoration for a film. We can have a sliver of negativity, I think, here on our Punch Drunk Loves, but we're going to do it in a healthy way. So we would say here is, what's the one criticism about this film that you'd readily accept?
So I basically consider this film to be perfect, in my opinion, in terms of just like how it's able to capitalize on, again, that blending of genres and whatnot. And at the same time, it's kind of double-edged and a little bit of a cop-out, but like how simplified the story is, that it allows the strengths of this film to shine through in a way that don't feel hindered by something that at the end of the day is probably not that interesting, which is the narrative. But at the same token, the narrative of this and the structure of it is about as bare bones as it gets, right? You've got the drug triad guys, or the people in crime that want to get out. It's not inventive in that regard. It doesn't deviate from that very simplistic blueprint that I've just described. And you get the semblance of who characters are, but you don't really get to spend a lot of time with them to understand anything past their sort of blanket motivations for what they're doing. So I would say that, the one aspect of this film that could use work in basically every way, while still not being this overall hindrance, is just the story and the structure of it. At the same time, though, who's to say that amending that and putting more emphasis on those things wouldn't then make this film feel a little bit more bloated? Because like I said earlier, at 2 hours, it doesn't feel like a 2-hour movie, in my opinion. And, I've seen a couple of the deleted scenes that were published on YouTube after the fact. They're story focused, and I don't find that they add anything to that. There's like a scene where the operator goes to basically buy her guns for going on this mission, which I don't think adds anything. And then there's an interesting deleted scene that it'll make sense once I describe what it was, but like there's that meeting after Arian doesn't allow Alma to kill the little girl, right? And so he goes and meets with the boss. And there's an addition to that scene that got cut where somebody comes in with like a cardboard box and opens it for him, and basically like his wife or girlfriend has been decapitated. And you know, that was one of those things where I saw that and I was like, oh, that's interesting, but how does that make him more indebted to the 6 C's? Like, I didn't understand what that really adds, other than being like, his loved one has been killed. So it's like the notion that you're going to add more to his backstory along those lines. I don't see that being included, and it not being sort of this messy thing where it's like, oh, we're putting more time on this, which then makes him more sympathetic, which goes against the initial conceit of like, Ito is this guy that is trying to atone for past sins and everything like that. And so it's a double-edged sword for me, where it's like, if you try to amend the narrative or make it more meaningful or anything like that, then you get in the way of what makes this film, in my opinion, perfect, which is, again, the action and the violence and whatnot. But for you, like, I'm curious, what is an aspect of the film that you think could have used some work, or something that maybe could have just been handled better in general?
I like how punchy the start is in a lot of ways, but I think it starts a little too abruptly, you know? I think there's a little too much that it just happens like that. I mean, I could see criticism of how slight the story is. But as you say, I get why, you know, you're always going to look at it from our side here and say, well, you know, it works for the story they're telling, and it's what makes the pace work. There is that section after after he escapes the police riot van thing, to those fights we mentioned, where it kind of loses a little steam, but not too much. You know, I think it's probably necessary at that point, given how much you'd had by then. You know, the scene preceding it basically has been one long, you know, assault on the senses. So it's fine. I think that's fine. But yeah, I could see how that could aggrieve, you know, in those ways. But yeah, that's it. Different opinions on different things, isn't it? So
I'm trying to remember what it's getting intercut with. I think that during the apartment fight, there are scenes that are being intercut with that it moves away from and moves back to, which I think kills a little bit of the steam of the apartment fight itself. I'm struggling to remember what that was, but like it bleeds into the van fight, right? Where it's going between that, and then it cuts back to something else. And that moment always gives me a little bit of pause. I think it's the van fight and then Faith in the garage. And it's going between those two periodically, where I was always like, I wish she'd let one of these breathe more. It comes back to what I said about the final fight at the end with the operator and Alma, where it's just like, that was allowed to breathe. But then you go backwards and it's like, okay, well, there's a lot of intercutting between these two. I wish that they could just be their own separate things. At the same time, it's a pretty small critique.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's healthy critiques, I'd say. So that is it for episode 1 of our Punch Drunk Gloves. Jay, thank you very much for being the first guest.
Of course. There's no podcast I'd rather be the guinea pig for than this one for a first episode. So I'm just happy not only to see you doing your solo movie endeavor, but at the same time getting to gush about a film that I love very much, and finally having a platform to do it.
There you go. That's always the point of these things, isn't it, really?
A personal indulgence, if there ever was one, but I'm happy for the opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'll be back with another guest, another film soon. Until then, go show your punch drunk love for your favourite films.